Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a very special stream. And I'm just going to make sure audio is working. Can you say hi, Josh?
I can. You're asking for me. Yep. Hey. Hopefully folks can hear.
I think it's coming in lovely. I think we're going to have a good time today. It might be a small chat audience, but we'll have plenty of people participating in the future. So, hello, welcome to something we don't get to do very often. Thank you, Peristroke Ghoul, for checking in on the audio. But this is an interview I have with a good friend of mine from, gosh, almost a decade and change now. It's been
Hmm.
it's been a very long time. But my friend Josh Aiken won a chapbook contest, and we are gonna get to talk about his book today, and that's very exciting. Um, Introduce yourself, Josh. I don't want to take up all of the screen time talking about how great you are. I'll have you do that.
Okay. Well, one, Mikkel, thank you so much for having me on. And um, I am geographically located right now in New Haven, Connecticut, on Quinnipiac land. I am currently a JD PhD student, JD PhD candidate in African American Studies and History. Have to say candidate to remind myself that I've gotten past some hurdle of being in school for far too long. Um, I am a Midwesterner at heart, and I'm the youngest of three siblings. I'm a Taurus, and I wrote this chapbook of poetry from Palette Poetry, and I'm excited to talk about it today.
Cool. So we're gonna me and Josh haven't connected in many numbers of years because after you graduate an institution, you tend to go off into the winds. So we're gonna take a second to remember where we came from. And I'm gonna bring up something that Josh, you don't have to worry. We're not gonna read from any of these, but I do have more books still. So, as a reference, Josh and I met back in Washington University in St. Louis, where we were part of a organization called Woo Slam, which was the Washington University Slam Poetry Group, and it was a great time. And for many years, Josh and I spent lots of times in various buildings writing, practicing, memorizing, doing way too much organizational duties at the expense of some academic duties that we may or may not have had prioritized incorrectly or correctly, depending on the time of day. But Josh has been a phenomenal person since I've met him in a little venue on campus called Ursa's. I think it's still called Ursa's. I hope it's still there. And yeah, I have a very clear memory of the first time I saw Josh perform because Josh beat everyone and it was great. That very first September slam of the new year, I was a sophomore. I was excited, and it was great. And for many years, Josh and I have kept in touch in various ways. So I was very excited to hear that he had released a whole new collection of poetry out into the world, and I'm excited that we get to talk about it today. So, am
Well,
I
I mean,
am I
I'll just say
missing
really
anything?
quickly the Woo Slam uh, history or genealogy is a good one, and I think I for a number of reasons. Um, I look back on that community and that space and some of the folks that we crossed paths with and some of the community that was built and feel like it is part of both a political and creative energy that has rippled more places than people might know. And I think there's some special origins there. So I appreciate you bringing us back home to that.
I mean, that's where we started, and look at us now. I think it's 12 years or maybe 13, depending on exactly when we wanna start the clock. But it's exciting, and Should I just read the Chen Chen's judge's citation of this book before we talk about it specifically, or I
I'll
think
always take Shin Chin's words.
I,
So
I, I think I think Chen Chen says it the best. So Chen Chen was one of the judges for the Palette Poetry Chapbook contest, and I feel like they do a great job summoning up. So, who is this healing really for? Wonders one poem in this collection full of wondering and wonderment. This constellation of poems spilling over with the vast aches of a heart so attuned to life, loss, and more life. To step into the world of to be in and of is to understand the ins and ofs that shape an ever shifting black queer existence and imagination. How a preposition can be a position, a perspective, a power, imposed or embraced, relived or revised, to step into the gorgeous, dizzying cosmos of this chapbook to declare, while raunchy, while righteous, to sing, we kissed, and for weeks nothing was my enemy, and ultimately to invent a galaxy of sound. Oh God, this is always a good sign when the writing that inspires a good like blurb gives you chills. So I'm excited to talk about this book in proper right now. So to be an of, where do you want to begin with how you sort of crafted this book that now exists out in the world as of a couple months ago?
I think that I have been working on this collection of poems in one way or another for a very long time. The span of when these poems were first written is at least 7 or 8 years. And one of the things I'll just point to the title, which had been with me, but hadn't kind of occurred that, oh, it's the title of this collection. It's the title of this span of time and this experience that I want folks to hopefully have when they read the chapbook. And it really comes from a place of trying to remind myself of a type of indebtedness to place and experience and people. I think you know this about me, folks that I've been in classes with or that I've my students that I've taught or whatever it's been know this about me. I'm someone who brings a lot of quotes from other authors, artists, theorists, scholars into many of my sentences because I think I have been so influenced by the ability of others to articulate who they are and where they're from and what shaped them and what is shaping them now, that the language they use, I think, really undergirded for me that the language that I wanted to use in putting forth a voice had to be in relationship with where the sense that I had a voice and it was worth amplifying remotely and respecting, that I needed to name, locate, and understand and be with. Not just kind of like a heady understanding, but actually just like sit in the muck of the the things we're of and the things that we're in. So I think the poems are from a large span of time. I think it was about last year this time. No, wow, year and a half.
Time gets
Yeah,
you these days.
yeah. Last spring of 2022, when the poems that work as through lines, the leftovers poems, really announce themselves to me as being necessary and out in the world. Um, and it's ironic because I think I had published a lot of individual poems in journals, and that had been really kind of my focus was the individual poem itself and the craft there and on that level. And the poems about leftovers come from a lot of different places, a lot of what Chinchin's referencing to in terms of uh, understanding grief and loss and what it is to try and live and make life amidst that.
Mm-hmm.
And it just feels like those poems just were a megaphone shouting at me every morning, being like, hey, we're here and you're here. Let's talk about it. And yeah, I think that's
I think that's a great segue where I'm now going to show the table of contents of your book right now to everyone watching, and for those watching, you're also going to get to see some of the text on screen, which is terrifying for me because I. But here we are. This is the table of contents for to be and of, and as you can see, as Josh mentioned, like the leftovers is one of these poems, and one of the things I wanted to talk about is the sort of structure you set up, where you have almost like this prologue of full poems that then lead into these two distinct parts. What was it like constructing that particular like setup? Like, did you always know that this was a prologue? Was it a two-part chapbook at some point? Was it a multi-part chapbook at some point? Was there an and at any point? Because I know we would have loved to do that.
yeah. I mean, I think that I always in readings found myself having prologue poems or prologue insistences, where I felt that it was really important for me to locate where I was speaking from and what I was carrying with me into a space. And I knew that before I was going to be able to have my poems do anything else, I needed to start somewhere. And I think the prologue and these first four poems kind of acting as a before, um, one tries to like set a stage for what kinds of voices are we going to, I almost want to say like have to deal with
Mm-hmm.
moving through
Mm-hmm.
this chapbook and these poems, but also what kind of experience of the world are we not going to let ourselves off the hook from? Because I think that's the other part of how these poems came together was holding a lot of words and feelings and needs to express the process of getting to know myself and know my own voice
Mm-hmm.
and wanting to create an experience in terms of the structure of the chapbook that asks the reader to move with me and these kind of encounters with different mirrors at different angles and encounters that each poem being an event is a glance or a fight, uh, and trying to make that part of the work because it was part of the process. And I think the structure, uh, you know, having a prologue and then asking you to go in is exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah.
It's uh, trying to invite the reader to come along because the particularities and specificity that these poems contain are invitations
Mm-hmm.
more than they are descriptions or detail.
One of the things that I love your work for is your use of brackets, italics, dashes, backslashes, any sort of way to like identify voice. And right now, I'm sharing Leftovers Part One on screen right now, and it does this really cool thing where like you know exactly what is being talked about and how it like fits into this world based on like the different like annotations that you provide. And this is something that Dennis Smith brought up in your chapbook released many moons ago, was like that ding, like it's in this bracket and it has such a unique oral quality to it, even though it's in text, but like you hear it, and then you hear it within the context of like this busy dining area, and you get all of these like snippets around you, and it's a lot of information to take in, but the way that you organize it always feels like manageable, and you get so many different perspectives and voices into it, and I'm so impressed with it.
I appreciate that. I think the desire to try and get even close to the experience of how sound and the music of language is actually encountered in the world, and the both power and I think passion that accompanies it is what the Leftovers poems ended up being so much about, and trying to create poems that bring folks into that type of space and those multiple voices. Also, for me, was really about one of the things that became the most important to me in kind of studying poetry and doing a lot of that study on my own. And it was learning to read poems aloud and learning that that is not just something that slam poetry brought to my life and gave me insight into, but was an experience of, woo slam and performing on a stage and hearing a poem aloud, bringing poetry and poesis back to its origin, back to what its role in kind of this universe of language is. And it's to ask us to lift the value of what we're hearing, of sound, to whatever connotations we might have for the words that are being said. And the dings, Dinez asked if this was ever a slam poem, and it wasn't, but it has been a poem that I've used kitchen timers with many times. I won't subject anyone to that right now, but
that can be in the extra credits that we film afterwards. So bonus content. Speaking of studied, and that's a fun word for you to choose, because you are also an academic in addition to being a poet. And if we look at the acknowledgments and the notes all the way at the bottom of the chapbook, I think I overshot it. You cite studies, you cite so many different like academic stuff, and you make it very approachable for the reader as you're discussing these like very like high level topics that like this is a very there's a lot going on here, but it always feels accessible, and you make it a point sort of like the reason you're bringing this in is because you want to discuss it at a level that like everyone can appreciate and understand, even if they don't have that particular like knowledge base or vantage point.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I spent all of my 20s more or less in school, and I talk about in some of the part 2 and part 3 of Leftovers, I didn't plan on that, and one of the things that being able to study, and I mean that in the sense of not like a university being a place that gives you assignments or instruction, but rather study in terms of paying close attention to how we experience and move through the world. And kind of Fred Moten and Stefano Harney describe as Black study as something that also is happening in the shadows and in opposition to often the institutions. It means that there's a humility around the language and the discourses and the bodies of knowledge that folks acquire. So I feel like I always describe it spent 2 years after time at WashU, spent 2 years at Oxford, and that what I was most grateful for was time.
Mm-hmm.
And that I talk about my cousins quite a bit in these poems. And one of the things that I always sort of try to press upon people is I don't know the differences between me and my cousins in a lot of ways, in terms of a lot of ways we may have been situated in the world, and at different points in time, and never accepting kind of ideas or notions of someone being smart as much as someone who has the space and time to acquire like a vocabulary that registers with the people who decide what is smart or what it is studied or informed. So that's all to say that I spent a lot of time in school, and still am, and figuring out, is that worth it? Who knows? But the notes really are an effort to just kind of push the idea that poetry is something that is separate from our other bodies of knowledge or thought. So like separate from history, or separate from social science, or separate from I have a whole thing about my poem after and for Frankie Knuckles, and it includes a few George Bush quotes and Condoleezza Rice is speaking, and that all of that is there because poetry is not outside of any of that. It's what moves and breathes and brings life to much of that. And so in the poem History Never Repeats Itself, but it sure can rhyme, I talk about the Panther 21 in New York, and just having the chance to put somewhere in the world written down just a little bit about what that trial involved and the things that took place, including just getting a police officer who was undercover for the FBI to confess that, yes, he had betrayed his community. And, Assata Shakur's or not Assata, but members of the Shakur family and others are the folks who are representing themselves in this court case, and just trying to remind that the ideas of expertise and knowledge and understanding are not what the Western world has given us. That there's so much intellect and curiosity that is with being in the world, being of it, being with it, and trying to underscore that by taking, fairly technical studies and putting them right in the mix of everyday language, hopefully.
So, we're running short on time because Zoom has decided that there are time limits to things right now. So I want to get you reading at least one or two poems before this abruptly ends. I do want to call out History Never Repeats Itself as my favorite poem in the chapbook because I love a pantoum. so much. I love the structure. I love what you did with it. If you would want to read it, that'd be great. But you also probably have a list of stuff that you would like to highlight. So I will defer to you on what you would like to leave our audience with. So we got about 8 minutes left before like things might stop.
Okay. Then I'm just gonna hop right into a poem that has been on my mind, called "Scorpions in Bethesda," and per our discussion, uh, begins with a little bit of research and information. It begins with this epigraph. Scorpions are small 35-pound precision glide bombs, quote, probably no bigger than a violin case, used by the Central Intelligence Agency. Under the Obama administration, the use of drone strikes was significantly increased, claiming a significant reduction in civilian killings. The administration used an estimation method that involved, quote, counting all military-age males in a strike zone as combatant unless there is explicit intelligence posthumously proving them innocent. Calling a hole a home is to murmur in Morse code, is to reject the scattering of a place, to cough up debris. Far away firewood is a tickling mother. Firewood, just a frightening ghost. Death, just the aftermath, the unaccompanied result. If you crawl from underneath X, you must be within or subsumed by X. It follows, one could say, that an ordered strike from a drone involves the feeling that comes after kissing a child goodnight. Dangerous particles. X must accept might graze wise skin before the world turns bright again. It comes with the territory, it being violence, it being the forest floor. Venom is a healing substance. It, the subject of our bodies, is the rearmor. It, the generous poison, saves us from ourselves. It, the bare life, relies on the notion that the shepherd clothed us too. My empty nest, burdened above, holds a knitted blanket. My destructed is casted, lesser evil. My destructed is not made of my brother's limbs. My destructed is not the same, but the shell. If death be in my name, what explodes but the baseball bat, Grandpa Baguette, the rubber tires beneath my mother's oiled dragon, barreling across Turtle Island, and the beetles, the bison, the violin singing, mercy, all the while, there are inflamed arachnids piercing Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Afghanistan, the frightened, thundered, unsound sky.
Oh, that hits different now too. Are we hitting our time? Can you say something again? Okay.
Yes. We've got a little less than 4 minutes. I'm gonna read a poem about love and grief.
Cool.
Um,
What's the title
and
so I can have the group follow
yes,
along?
it's hunger. While I
Hunger.
wait, and the only man who loves me. It's after a poem called Homicide by Essex Hemphill.
Excellent. All right. Take us away.
I spent my grief on you, but fault myself for making of everything a currency. I fixed myself underneath a stop sign in the rain, but I was in your arms, feckless, because someone I love was dead again. This time, even the funeral was too far away. Distance, always a metric of distinction. Me readily lost in your chest, your breathing crumpled as you offered to carry me home. It was mackerel, prawn, monkfish, a menu before my eyes after I told you I'm good, but should eat. I told you I can't be an experiment. And we kissed, and for weeks, nothing was my enemy. You'd come home sweaty from sport and cook peanut stew, and we'd take turns being weary. You of prescription and divinity, me of my fingernails, the pitch of my voice, of how easy I am to win. I don't know what you needed or need, but I smoked menthols, spilled whiskey, lied to everyone, made of my mourning a stage, a stature, condition, a state. The prized jewel once in between our knees won't take me headless. I'm useful and discreet. Listen, I forgive me. You loved me in sorrow, love, sorrowed, and I loved sorrow eagerly. I needed a place to be. A harpoon doesn't wait for a squid to get lonely. I spent months there, in bed with your window open, unsure of the day. In practice, you're kind, and so am I. Thus, we're prone to being prudishly cruel. I was. I am. Familiar with, not undone, by men who precisely want me off my feet.
That was Josh Aiken reading from his chapbook To Be and Of. I am sorry for the abrupt ending to the stream, but that is what we work with in the capitalist framework. Josh, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, hopefully this interview will be up on YouTube soon. And Josh, it's always a pleasure to hear you talk about your work. So I hope you have a great rest of the day. I hope everyone gets a copy of this book, and I hope everyone who joined us to watch that you had a great time. Have a good night, folks. We'll be back sometime in the future, hopefully with longer than 40 minutes. All right.